Public facilities, if you remember that pie chart I showed you on day one that showed kind of where grantees are spending their money, public facilities and public improvements was probably the number one category there. So a lot of grantees doing public facilities and improvements. I would say it's probably one of the more well-known activities under CDBG. Not a lot of detail or regs or requirements associated with it, but there are some nuances, and we'll touch on those. So before we get started, just to kind of, there's eligible activities, right? And then there's eligible costs. And kind of Rudy's going to go through kind of the basic framework there and cost principles, but in essence, it's saying you can do public facilities and improvements, but what specific activity are you funding to accomplish that? Okay, and so if you think about public facilities and improvements, it's not that much dissimilar to housing activities. And so you can do acquisition, you can pay for acquisition, you can do construction, reconstruction, installation of a public facility or improvement, and then you can do obviously rehab on a public facility improvement. So those are the kind of things that you can fund under public facilities and improvement. Here we go. All right. So best way to think about public facilities improvements is in three categories, right? So if you think about category one, we're talking about infrastructure type improvements. And so the best way to kind of break infrastructure down is think about concrete, so your streets, your sidewalks, your parking facilities, and then your water, your sewer lines, your waste facility connections, those lines that carry that out. Those are all eligible infrastructure type activities. So your streets, all those things, okay? Street lights, all those things are eligible. In terms of the second category, neighborhood facilities, think about all those community facilities, those things that bring community together. Okay, so your recreational facilities, your parks, your playgrounds, your community centers, all those are eligible public facilities under this category. So here we get into facilities for persons with special needs, okay? We talked about this a little bit yesterday when we got into housing, okay? The idea here is that it's a public facility if it's transitional in nature. If it's permanent housing, where the expectation is that they're going to stay there permanently, that's a housing activity. If it's transitional, i.e. they're going to stay there for 2 or 3 years, and the idea is that they move on to somewhere else, then it's a public facility, okay? So your nursing homes, your group homes, your homeless shelter, your facilities for or shelters for victims of domestic violence, abused children, all those things are public facilities because it's meant to be a temporary stay, okay? Now, the key thing about public facilities specifically is that they must be owned or operated by who? A public agency or a nonprofit, right? A public entity or a nonprofit, okay? For-profit entities do run public facilities. I'm not saying that. You just can't assist those for-profits with CDBG dollars, okay? For you to assist it with CDBG, it has to be owned or operated by a public entity or nonprofit, okay? Okay, the other thing about public facilities, it's meant to be open to the public, okay? So to accomplish that, it has to have normal operating hours, okay? It can't be open from 12 midnight to 5 a.m. That's not a normal operating business hour for a public facility. Not many people are probably going to visit that facility if those are the operating hours. So it needs to be open during normal business hours, 9 to 5, 8 to 5, 8 to 6, those kind of hours, okay? The other critical thing is that you can charge a fee to use the public facility. It just needs to be a nominal fee. And there's very loose guidance on what a nominal fee is. But I would say if it's, let's say you're charging a low-income household $35 to use the community center over the course of a year, that's nominal. If you're charging them $500 to use that community center over a year, that's probably excessive. Okay, so you can charge fees, but they have to be nominal. Okay. So what can't you do? Okay, so we talked about this a little bit yesterday when I said those generally not acceptable activities or ineligible activities. Maintenance and repair of public facilities. So things like replacing the screens on windows, that's a maintenance activity. Okay, trimming the hedges around the trees or bushes around the facility, that's a maintenance issue. If you remodel the space, okay? Remodel the community center. That's a rehab activity, that's eligible, okay? But general maintenance type things or repairs, you fix a leaking roof, that's a maintenance activity. If you want to replace the roof, that's a rehab activity, that's eligible, okay? ADA improvements, obviously, those are eligible, even if that's all you're doing as an eligible activity, you can do ADA improvements. Operating costs, remember, generally not acceptable. However, and Rudy's going to talk on this when he talks about public services, if there's a service being provided out of that facility, okay, you can provide operating costs to that to the nonprofit that's delivering that public service. That's eligible, but not for the operating and maintenance of the public facility as a whole, okay, just for that service being provided out of that facility. Okay. Buildings for the conduct of general conduct of government, i.e. City Hall, again, generally not acceptable. However, if you're doing ADA improvements or something like that on City Hall, that's eligible activity. Yes, ma'am.
If you have a community center, had some plumbing issues and it damaged the gym floor, could we replace the floor or just?
Sure. You can replace the floor.
Could you just repair the damaged part? Or have to
That would probably be considered maintenance. And I would say if it's a whole plumbing issue, if you can combine that with replacing the floor, that's a rehab activity. If it's just, I'm going to replace this little piece in the plumbing pipe and repair these planks of the wood floor, that's maintenance. Yeah.
Just do the whole floor and the plumbing?
I would say you would want to do the whole floor if you needed to do the whole floor. Now here's an interesting discussion. Question for you guys. Can you fund fire trucks or firefighting equipment as a public facility? How many say yes? How many say no? One person in the back said yes. They are correct.
Really?
Yes, you can fund for fire trucks and firefighting equipment. The reason is it's specifically defined in the statute as an eligible activity under public facilities. Okay?
So what would the
Fire
national
trucks.
objective be?
Area benefit. Yeah. Can you fund police cars? Can you buy police cars under CDBG under the same kind of premise? No, can't. What about ambulances?
Oh, well, that's part of the firehouse.
I have no idea.
If they're part of the fire department where they normally send out an ambulance, the fire call, that's considered part of the fire equipment. Okay, but there has to be that connection. Okay, it can't be an ambulance coming from somewhere else. It has to be a part of their normal fire safety protocol where they send out an ambulance in conjunction with the fire department, and they're kind of the same unit. Okay, yes. All right, so I think Rudy covered this pretty well in his example here that you see here. Typically, infrastructure and public facility improvements are seen as benefiting the community at large, and so area benefit is going to be the most common national objective that you apply to that. However, some of the public facilities that are targeting victims of domestic violence, special needs populations, those could be classified under low mod clientele. Okay? And then obviously, if you're doing low mod housing, we talked about yesterday, if you did the utility connections to support new construction of housing, that's technically a public improvement, but because it's in support of housing, it's you use the housing national objective. Okay, so we kind of covered that yesterday. Okay, but if you're installing a main sewer line or water line, obviously, then that's an area benefit activity. Okay. Special assessments. Probably very seldom used under CDBG, but it could be effective in some communities. Special assessments are used to recover capital costs through a fee or charge. That's just kind of the CDBG definition of a special assessment. So under CDBG, you think about that in two ways, right? One, you're going to use CDBG dollars to recover the costs of a CDBG public assisted property. So in other words, you're collecting a fee for installing that new street, that new sewer line, that new water line. You're collecting a fee, okay? So you pay for the improvement with CDBG dollars, and then you issue a special assessment onto the households living in that area, okay? So that's one way to do it, is to pay for the cost and then assess a fee to recover those costs. Or you can use CDBG dollars to pay for private assessments of low and moderate income occupants. So let's say you use city dollars to install a new street or install a new sewer line. You can use CDBG dollars to pay for the cost of the special assessment fee that's then levied on the low mod households living in that area. Okay, so if the city issues a special assessment fee to those low mod households, you can use CDBG dollars to pay for that. If you don't have enough CDBG dollars to pay for the fee for everyone in that area that's benefiting from that in that area, you can use CDBG dollars just to pay for the low income households in that area. So you kind of take off the mod and use it to pay for the low income households. Okay? Again, very seldom used, but it is an eligible activity that you could fund. Okay? Privately owned utilities. So you can use CDBG to cover the cost of utilities owned by private company, not the public agency. Okay? So very similar activities that you can pay for here, similar to what you can do under public facilities in general. Acquisition, construction, reconstruction, rehab, installation, all eligible for privately owned utilities. The idea here is, though, that these are publicly regulated utilities. Privately owned, publicly regulated. Okay? So what does that include? Things like electricity, telephone, water, sewer, natural gas, television, cable, broadband. There's actually a recent FAQ that was issued by HUD on using CDBG dollars to pay for broadband. And so I encourage you to kind of look at that FAQ. It's something that I know a lot of cities are grappling with, how they get internet access, broadband internet access to low mod areas. And so you can use CDBG dollars to pay for that. It's an eligible public facility improvement cost. Okay. Of course, assisted by CDBG, it must meet a national objective. Typically, it's going to be an area benefit, possibly low mod job creation if you decide to select that. I wouldn't recommend it. And then possibly slum blight or urgent need. But again, choose the path of least resistance when you're determining your national objective. The one that requires the least documentation will probably be the area benefit. You can justify it easily there. Again, seldom used under CDBG, but certainly eligible. Yes, ma'am.
Could it be used for to assist with the expenses of maybe moving lines underground?
Yes.
Yes?
That would be a perfect scenario, yep. If you take power lines on the street, on those poles, and you want to bury that underground, you can pay for that cost. It's a great example of what you could do there.